Well, hello and welcome to Nature's a Hoot. This is the wildlife podcast brought to you from the Hawk Conservancy Trust. Join me, Tom Morath, as I delve into the hidden world of feathers and talons and discover more about the fascinating world of these incredible creatures. Today, we're going to be talking all about owls and answering the question, can owls really turn their head all the way around? Well, hello and welcome to Nature's a Hoot. This is a brand new series for us here on the podcast. I'm Tom Morath. I'm going to be your host as we discover all sorts about birds of prey. We're here in what we like to call Nature's a Hoot HQ, nestled in a quiet corner of the Hawk Conservancy Trust Visitor Centre here in Hampshire. Out the window to my right, African whiteback vultures. Out the window to my left is where we make and build the boxes for our Raptor Nest Box project. So we couldn't be any more in the heart of the work that we do. Now I'm joined by a very exciting guest here, one of my very esteemed colleagues, Jamie. Hi Jamie, would you like to say hello to our lovely listeners here and just tell us a bit about who you are and what you do here?
Yeah, so my name's Jamie McKaughan. I'm a year into my time here at the Hawk Conservancy Trust, and my role is the Conservation and Research Coordinator. So I work in the field predominantly with Dr Matt Stevens on our British Raptor programme, but then I also work coordinating our international projects, getting the information from those conservation projects and passing that out among our different teams. So we all know what's going on, what's the latest, and ensuring our engagement is all evidence-based.
Excellent. And I think we've probably undersold you, Jamie, because you're actually the doctor, aren't you, really? Dr Jamie, we like to call you here.
I am also Dr Jamie, yes. So my background was actually in large mammals, so particularly with large carnivores in southern Africa, so I was quite familiar with lots of the things we did in terms of the vulture work, and always had a passion for birds of prey, but it wasn't what I did my PhD in. But I've really enjoyed being here and learning more and helping move this conservation part forwards.
It's excellent. And do you know what? I think it's really important that we have a bona fide scientist here on the podcast who will make sure that everything I'm saying is factually correct, because there's all sorts of myths and legends surrounding birds of prey, surrounding the natural world that need to be busted. And in actual fact, we're hoping to do that here today on the show because it's all about owls, and in particular one question that we'd like to answer before we get to the end of today's show, which is all about that classic thing of an owl turning its head all the way around. Now, we love owls here, don't we?
Absolutely.
Have you got a favourite owl?
Hard to pick. I do like all the owls we find in Great Britain, particularly probably the barn owl. I think that's probably stock answer, but it
See, I'm a tawny owl man.
Oh.
Yeah, I love that tenacity that they've got, that real character, and regular Nature's a Hoot listeners might be familiar with Sage, the tawny owl who we work with here, who I first met when she was about 10 days old, so I raised her from a chick, so maybe I'm just a little bit biased on that, a little bit biased. Now, as I mentioned, there's all sorts of features about the wonderful world of owls that is fascinating, and so much about what we know about owls is fascinating and true, but we are going to try and see whether any of those things that we think are true about owls are actually true. Let's talk a little bit about the way that they hunt and catch their food, Jamie, because unlike something like a falcon, it is all about out and out speed, maybe a goshawk, which is about agility, the owls choose a stealth approach, don't they, instead?
Yes, exactly that. So obviously in that arena of the stealth surprise, you're not wanting to make a load of noise and bustle through like you mentioned with the falcons or the goshawks in the woodlands. So you need to be quiet. And with the owls, they've got these really nice soft feathers. They're very full of feathers, and those particular designs of those feathers help with that silent flight, or typically very silent flight.
Yeah, I've actually got a couple of feathers here with us here in the HQ. And we've actually got two different types of feathers here. I'm sure perhaps as you're watching along, you might be able to tell just from the patterning of the feathers the differences between the two and which one might be an owl feather. But Jamie, you can sort of tell at a glance, can't you, with these?
Yeah. And you can also get that softness there, which is just completely different. And when you look at them under a microscope, it's really cool. You get these tiny little pockets of space, and that contributes to how the feel is different. And that lets some of that air pass through the gaps in the microscopic gaps between the parts of the feather.
So this one here has come from a Eurasian eagle owl, one of the largest species of owl in the world. And you can really see it. I'm not sure I can get that close enough to the camera there for you to be able to see those little serrations along the edge of the feather. And essentially that, well, what does that do, Jamie? Those serrations, how do they actually help the bird stay quiet?
Yeah, absolutely. So on the leading primary, so the front feather of the bird's wing, it has those tiny serrations, and it's that comb-like effect. So when the air passes through them, it actually disrupts the air currents, and it actually makes a very cool sort of vortex shape, so these spirals underneath, and that effectively just dissipates all those sound waves and effectively enables it to fly with that without making noise.
Yeah, and it's almost silent, isn't it? I mean, certainly to human ears, when we're experiencing these birds flying through, when we're flying our birds here at the Trust, you cannot hear a sound, can you, when they beat their wings?
Yeah, exactly.
Now, in comparison, I've just dropped it here, this is from one of our bald eagles, and it's important to mention these have dropped off of our birds naturally. All of our birds molt each year, and they grow a whole new set of feathers. This one's very different, isn't it? Look at that very fine and defined line all the way around the edge of that feather. This is actually a wing feather of the eagle owl, whereas this is a tail feather, so they're slightly different jobs to do, but you get the idea, don't you? They're very different in general kind of makeup. Well, that's feathers covered then, and an owl's ability to have near silent flight. But Jamie, I've heard tell of a special feature of owls' eyes that enable us to work out whether they are more daytime active, diurnal, nocturnal, coming out at night, or crepuscular, just on those cusps of the day at dawn and dusk. Now, is that actually true? Can we tell what time of day an owl is active in the wild just by looking at eye colour?
I suppose strictly I wouldn't say that you can. So there's research that's been done that looks at those different eye colours, and like you say, the light eyes are typically thought to be more light sensitive, and therefore they are daytime flying birds. Amber or orange eyes, that sort of middle light sensitivity, and are crepuscular. And then the dark eyes, which absorb a lot more light, enabling them to hunt better at night, and therefore suits the nocturnal birds. So as I was sort of saying, the research side of things actually doesn't necessarily marry up with those rules strictly. So
that would be so neat, wouldn't it? If you could just say dark eyes in the dark, light eyes in the day, and just be done with it. Yeah, but it's seldom that simple, is it?
No, exactly. And I think there's different parts of it that I suppose different areas might match up more closely, or different species groups or families, maybe I should say. So you've got Titonidae and you've got Strigidae, and
so they're two different groups of owls,
exactly,
aren't they? How we classify them.
Yeah, so your Strigidae are basically all owls that aren't barn or bay owls. So they have the huge variety of different eye colours, whereas the Titonidae have all dark eyes.
Okay.
So there's a potential that some of that marries up a bit closer, but even within that, there are exceptions to those rules. And generally speaking, outside of the families, you have about 60% of strictly nocturnal flying owls have those dark eyes, but that leaves a whole 40% that have variation, and so it's really tricky to say. I wouldn't personally say that 60% is enough to say that's a rule that we have. It's a bit like when you're at school and you learn that I before E except after C in English, and more exceptions than there are meet the rule. So not quite as dramatic as that, but I think there's it's difficult to apply that rule quite that broadly to these owls.
Okay, so we can't use that as a rule of thumb then to work out when they're supposed to be active. That makes sense. So I think to try and have a closer look at some of these sort of special adaptations and special features of the owl, we need to meet one. And Jamie and I did that earlier today as we met up with one of our great grey owls here at the Hawk Conservancy Trust. Take a look at this. So we've come here to our stunningly beautiful woodland arena because I thought, Jamie, we might try to meet one of these incredible birds that live here at the Hawk Conservancy Trust and showcase and show off those incredible special adaptations that we've spoken about on this week's episode. So come and have a look over here, as if by podcasting magic. We've got our beautiful Walter. Walter is a great grey owl. Look at this gorgeous bird. You can see some of those special adaptations we've already spoken about. Look at those lovely fluffy feathers.
You've got that nice leading edge of their wing as well with those serrated edges, that comb-like structure.
Yeah.
That helps them be really silent when they're flying, as we talked about. Just like that.
Yeah.
No noise.
You can't hear a thing, can you?
Didn't even know it'd taken off.
Yeah. Let's see whether we can get him to call back down again here. A bit more silent flight in action would be cool, wouldn't it? And also those sort of glowing yellow eyes as well.
Absolutely. So they're obviously, as we talked about, quite a prominent feature on our owls. They're big features of the owls in that quite a large head, but actually quite a small skull.
Yeah,
and
that's the thing with great grey owls. They're super deceptive, aren't they? He looks like such a large bird, but underneath all of those feathers, there's very little bird there, isn't there?
No, exactly. And like you said before, that feather structure, the number of feathers that soften that air current that also helps with that silent flight. Really good example.
So we've spoken a little bit about the sort of general overall shape of the eye as well. These birds look as if they've got these spherical round eyes, just the same as you and I have, but they're not quite like that, are they, for an owl?
No, exactly. So they're actually these sort of tubular type shapes. So they're long, and what they have is they're sort of almost fixed in place with something called a sort of bony structure called a sclerotic ring.
Wow.
And so it actually really almost stops them moving those eyes, basically. So it keeps them that really pointed forward facing, which in some ways, adds to how they look and that charisma that we like about how they appear.
I've heard some people describe them as looking a little bit more human-like because they've got those real forward-facing, round faces.
Absolutely, and that's sort of within that, with their vision, it does become quite human-like because we have the forward-facing eyes allow you to have what's called binocular vision, so where both eyes can look at one object at the same time. You're able to get a three-dimensional structure, so you can see the height, width, and depth of the object. So you get a very good depth perception, which obviously for them hunting is really important. And we can see that when we're talking, when we watch films, see each other. It's all that 3D structure that allows us to judge these distances.
Now, what's the most striking, I think, to me about the great grey owl is this big round facial disc. We've talked an awful lot about vision and about these birds being able to turn their heads, but I think what makes it even more striking when a great grey owl turns his or her head is this big round dish that they have on the front of their face. And this is all in order to allow the bird to listen for their prey down in the undergrowth. This is a little bit like cupping your hands behind your ears, isn't it?
Absolutely. It's that sort of satellite dish element of magnifying those sound waves and something, an owl like this, we touched on eye colour before about where some of those more typical habitats of those colours, coloured eyes are. They typically have very snowy habitats, so they're going to be trying to hear those things under the snow and ridiculously, in my opinion, they're able to still hear those things and successfully hunt them despite not being able to see anything that they're actually hunting.
It's amazing,
which is
isn't
amazing.
It? Yeah. And when you consider that eyesight for a great grey owl is very good at a long distance, but not so good up close. I often think when they've punched into the snow, they haven't seen the prey because it's under the snow, and then once it's in their talons, it's so close, they can't see it. So for maybe months at a time, you've got a species here that is not actually ever seeing the food that they're eating, which just seems bizarre to me. Okay, let's bring him in. Let's see if he'll come down once more here. I actually think he's being very smart here because every once in a while he flies off behind, comes back and gets an extra piece of food. It's perfect. He's training me.
Played the game.
Definitely. What a stunning bird. Very privileged to work with this species. I just love working with those birds. They're so special. Great grey owls, of course, not a species native to us here in the UK, but they are a species that we still showcase here at the Hawk Conservancy Trust to try and show that real variety that you find among the owl family out there in the wild. But we do work with some species in the wild from the Hawk Conservancy Trust, don't we, right here in the UK?
Yeah, exactly. So that forms part of our British Raptor programme. So we've got this Raptor Nest Box project. And that actually features 4 key species that we're working with on that project, and that's kestrels, which obviously are not an owl, but then we have little owls, tawny owls, and barn owls. So they're all what we call cavity nesting species. So they use either holes in trees or old barns, these kinds of things, to make their nest and rear their young. And so the reason we have that project is a lot of habitat has been lost in the UK over a number of years, obviously, but there are pockets that we still do have good habitat or suitable habitat for those owls and kestrels to use, but they might not necessarily have the nesting place to make use of that habitat. So in some ways it becomes, for want of better words, a dead territory, almost like it's there but it can't be used because they don't have those opportunities to nest. And part of that is how the world's changed. We typically take away lots of old trees for health and safety, those kinds of things, similar with old buildings, and that obviously impacts on these species and others outside of the world of bird of prey. So it's really important to be able to give those opportunities, and that not only gives them those nesting potential, but it also gives us other research opportunities that we might not otherwise have. So obviously when we check these boxes with our British projects manager, Dr Matt Stevens, he's licensed to do that, and we'll be able to see who's nesting where. And because we then have access to some of those boxes, you're able to start looking at other information. So things like their how many eggs they're laying, how many of those hatch, how many of those then fledge, and so you then get to build up a much broader picture of their status in our landscape, certainly in the area that we work in. So we've got about 1,600 nest boxes now for those 4 species, and that covers a core area of about 4,500 square kilometres. So it's a really strong core area, and then we also have a few extras further afield. So we on the broader picture is further than that, but that core area is where we do most of our work. And when Matt has those fledglings, he also rings them. So vitally, you get those stages of how many are surviving or going from egg to chick to juvenile. But then you get these rings on, and they're really, really important for research because they'll enable us to look forward as to how many will survive. So when those rings are recovered in whatever form that is, either they're spotted on photography, for example, or unfortunately in lots of cases where that bird has been found deceased, that gets reported back to a central point with the British Trust of Ornithology, or BTO as we often refer it as, and that enables us to then sort of look back, when was that bird ringed, what age is it now, and then you can obviously break that down, how many are surviving beyond year 1, year 2, etc.
Sure.
So it's really important on how we're actually seeing these birds survive in our landscape.
This is no small project, is it? You may have mentioned there, but we started with sort of 30 or so nest boxes way back in 2008, correct, and then we've got like 1,600 nest boxes now, which is exactly. It's a huge project to try to manage from a relatively small site here, isn't it?
Yeah, so it's over 900 barn owl boxes, so that's a bulk of them. But then you've also got a much smaller number of little owl boxes, and there's a couple of reasons for that they tend to seemingly nest well in this part of the country. That's not the case in other parts, so that information that we collect on where they do or don't nest is still really valuable on a broader scale, but that also is reflected in how many we get sort of as our minimum number of known to fledge from our boxes. And then we've got about 400-ish with kestrels and 380, I think, with tawny owls. So it's a good spread, and it's an important spread. And like I said, it really provides a lot of different information, bar just them using those nest boxes or having those nesting spaces.
And we're just managing now, aren't we, to kind of collate that information from our previous year of nesting. Of course, it takes quite a long time not only to go out and check those nest boxes and do all of this work, but also then to bring back all of that information and data and try and put it into some sort of usable format. What was 2024 like?
So 2024 was actually a really good year. We at the beginning of the year, we thought it was going to be a good year. It felt like everything was lining up. Things like the prey species level seemed good. But then there was a lot of rain, so our hopes were checked somewhat, but overall we still got a really good year. So like I mentioned, our little owl boxes are a much smaller ratio, so we had at least 7 little owls successfully fledged from those boxes. I think 66 minimum tawny owls, 200.
Yeah, I've got the figures here actually. So we've got 340 barn owls, 66 tawny owls, 220 kestrels.
Yeah,
that's pretty good going.
No, really good. And like I say, we you might have noticed I kept saying minimum or at least, and it's that element again of the timing can be so important as to just how many you know or don't know have gone. So we could be, let's say the kestrels, it's 30-ish days between hatching and fledging. If you're there on day 3, but you're aging them as best Matt can, who's obviously got years and years of experience of this type of thing, but he might be 2 or 3 days either side, or arrives 2 or 3 days later than they fledge, and you hope that all 5 fledge the nest, but you don't know that. So we work, like I said earlier, with that very much evidence-based, so we don't want to overstate something that's not true, because ultimately that only harms that species conservation. If we're there saying 700 fledged when we only know for sure that 300 fledged, while we might have some confidence in greater figures, it doesn't necessarily give the
full
right
picture.
Information and the right picture, exactly. So we're wary of overstating just what those figures are.
Now, the Raptor Nest Box project is just one example of the conservation research work that we're doing here at the Hawk Conservancy Trust, and it's something you can help. A like or a comment can go a really long way on this video, or choose to subscribe if you like the content that we're providing here, or even better, why don't you come and visit us here at the Hawk Conservancy Trust. Now, we have got a big question to answer. Let's answer that question now. So, Jamie, can owls turn their heads all the way around?
They cannot.
No, they can't.
Unfortunately not. So you probably saw with some of the clips we had when we were meeting Walter.
Yeah, we've got some footage actually of that. Have a look at this while we're talking.
So yeah, you could see him flipping his head around back and forth, but he never gets beyond 270 degrees. So all the way around the full field, there's that little wedge at the back that he doesn't quite cover.
So sort of 3/4 of the way around, really.
Yeah.
Now, of course, that's a much greater kind of field of movement than we've got as human beings. How is an owl like that capable of making that sort of movement?
So where we as humans have 7 vertebrae in our neck, they actually have double that number. So they've got 14 neck vertebrae. So that gives them that flexibility that we just physically don't have. We've got that range there, but then we've got the eyes that can move and cover that greater range.
Yeah, so actually this is not a great grey owl skull. This is a replica of an eagle owl skull here. And you can just see how large these sort of eye sockets are on this replica skull, can't you? And this starts to paint a picture as to why an owl needs to turn its head so far around. And you mentioned there, they can't move their eyes in their sockets, pretty much because they're so large, but also because they're a different shape. That's right, isn't it?
Exactly. So we've got these spherical eyes that enable us to obviously look left and right, as well as that adjustment with our necks, whereas they don't have that. They are those tube shapes, as you said, which are kind of locked in shape, locked in space, and so they can't really move left and right. Interestingly, with them, they have these within the eye itself. It's thought that they have a high level of what's called rod cells, and they're light sensitive, so they're good for picking up different levels of light and movement. And we've covered that a bit with some of the eye colour. But they have very few what are called cone cells. Both of those are aptly named because of that's the kind of shape those cells are. So the cone cells have that kind of shape, but they are what control colour. So where we have quite a high level of colour cells, and cone cells for colour, they allow us to see very well in colour. It's thought as a result of owls not having that many, but they typically can't see well in colour. So they'll typically have or thought to have a black and white or monochrome type, or very dim colour.
So they might not be seeing the full range of colour that we can.
Exactly. So while their depth perception is similar to ours, as we talked about before, the colour is completely different.
So there you have it, folks. An owl cannot turn its head all the way around. It can, however, turn its head about 270 degrees in either direction, which isn't bad when you think about it. Well, that's it for this episode of Nature's a Hoot. Thanks for joining us, and a massive thanks to our friends and sponsors over at Orange Planet Pictures, award-winning conservation and animal welfare-based filmmakers. They make all of this possible. If you want to support us, then subscribe to our channel here. A like and a comment also go a really long way. Thanks for joining us, and we will be with you next time. Thank you.